Welcome to another deep dive. We're tackling a fascinating subject today, the recent SmackDown episode you shared your sources on.
That's right.
It's packed with everything from, emotional tributes to these high-stakes buildups for SummerSlam, and we're here to unpack it all for you.
Yeah, our mission today is really to distill what matters, the strategic moves, the memorable moments, and just the overall impact of SmackDown as like a critical stop on the road to one of wrestling's biggest events.
Right.
What's really compelling here is watching how the show juggles multiple, often really contrasting elements, like a somber tribute right next to several ongoing, pretty intense feuds all in one broadcast.
Absolutely. So think of this as your shortcut to understanding not just what happened, but maybe more importantly, why it happened and what it could mean for the exciting stuff coming up. Okay, let's dive in. So the show kicked off with a really significant moment, that tribute to Hulk Hogan. How did SmackDown handle that emotional start?
Well, the episode began with the entire roster and actually several legends on stage. Triple H spoke about Hogan's passing before doing the traditional 10-bell salute.
Mm-hmm.
That solemn moment where they ring the bell 10 times for someone who's passed. Then this was followed by a pretty comprehensive video package looking at Hogan's life and career, and that was also narrated by Triple H.
And were there any specific reactions, maybe from the roster or the legends, that the sources pointed out as being particularly poignant during that?
Yes, definitely. Jimmy Hart, who was, a longtime manager and friend of Hogan's, he was noted as being visibly emotional, actually shedding tears on stage.
Wow.
But one particularly striking detail the sources highlighted was Cody Rhodes acknowledging that Hogan's legacy, despite the tribute and everything, is actually quite complicated. And this sort of touches on a broader thing about public figures, right? Especially in entertainment. Their impact can be huge, undeniable, but their personal lives or maybe controversial actions can create this really complex narrative that, organizations like WWE have to figure out how to navigate when they're honoring them.
Yeah, that definitely adds an unexpected layer to what's supposed to be a moment of remembrance. And speaking of unexpected, there was a kind of funny observation about Logan Paul during this bit too, wasn't there?
Indeed. Yeah, one notable observation from the sources was basically that there's just no way a WWE writer actually told Paul to pretend he thought the crowd was chanting "Thank you, Logan" during the Hogan segment.
Yeah.
It just seemed like a totally spontaneous moment that honestly perfectly captured his unique, often very self-centered on-screen personality.
Okay, so shifting gears from that powerful opening, Logan Paul comes out right after a commercial break. He's there to talk about his upcoming tag team match at SummerSlam, what went down with him and his guest, especially given his reputation for getting crowds riled up.
Well, returning to his hometown, Cleveland, Paul, true to form, pretty much immediately started insulting the crowd.
Of course.
He then brought out the musician Jelly Roll as his guest. And what was interesting here is Jelly Roll actually cut his own entrance short just so he could insult Paul from the aisle. Right away called him a silver spoon kid, which kind of set the tone for their interaction.
Huh. That's quite an intro. And I heard Jelly Roll looked pretty different from his last few appearances.
Oh, yeah. He has clearly been working out, lost a significant amount of weight since his first WWE appearance, and he showed absolutely zero intimidation getting in the ring with Paul.
Good for him.
Then the whole segment just escalated. Drew McIntyre slid into the ring, which immediately got the crowd chanting for Randy Orton. So, the Viper, he quickly arrived, decked McIntyre, and boom, it sparked an all-out brawl.
So strategically thinking, what did this segment actually achieve for the SummerSlam buildup? What was the goal there?
Well, look, while the outcome was maybe a bit predictable, right? This segment actually turned out to be quite effective in its strategic aims.
Okay.
It didn't just solidify the babyface momentum for Orton and Jelly Roll, the good guys the crowd should cheer for.
Right.
But it also brilliantly used Paul's natural ability to draw heat, that negative reaction from the audience.
Well,
McIntyre and Paul, they got the upper hand at first, but then Orton and Jelly Roll sent them packing out of the ring to end the segment.
nice.
The sources even kind of questioned why this segment, which clearly hit well with the crowd, wasn't maybe the main event segment. And there was a fun little moment noted where Jelly Roll started singing Orton's entrance song.
Oh, yeah.
And instantly got the whole crowd singing along with him. Pretty cool.
Okay, so after that star-studded brawl, the women's tag team division got the spotlight. A match to hype the upcoming title bout at SummerSlam. Alexa Bliss versus Roxanne Perez. Tell us about the dynamics of this one.
Right, so Charlotte Flair was with Bliss, and Raquel Rodriguez was with Perez. What was particularly interesting about this matchup, according to the sources, is that both Bliss and Perez are actually among the smallest women on the roster. And that dynamic kind of allowed them to show off a different style. Faster, more agile moves, maybe they wouldn't normally try against bigger opponents. It definitely gave the match a unique flow.
So a different kind of match flow then. What were the standout moments?
Exactly. So Bliss started making a comeback after a commercial break. Flair's cheering her on, and she hit Perez with a whole flurry of offense. Then there was an interesting moment where Flair and Rodriguez started fighting at ringside, which kind of drew attention away. Alexa then hits her signature move, the Twisted Bliss, that diving somersault thing, seemingly to save her partner from the ringside fight. But when she got back in the ring, Perez quickly rolled her up, used the ropes for leverage.
Classic heel move.
Yep, and got the win over a visibly bloody Bliss.
Bloody Bliss. Whoa, what happened there?
Yeah, it was actually hard to tell the exact cause from the broadcast, but she was definitely bleeding at the end. Added a sort of unexpected visceral element. Other little things noted. Charlotte did a pretty good job looking like she was, begrudgingly carrying pom-poms for Bliss, playing up their sort of unlikely team dynamic.
Right.
And Rodriguez standing, quite a bit taller than Flair was a good visual reminder of just how tall she is.
Okay, moving on to the next part of the night.
Yeah.
We had a match between Jade Cargill and Chelsea Green that seemed to start pretty abruptly. What went down there?
Yeah, it was really sudden. Jade Cargill actually got into a fight with Chelsea Green backstage first.
Okay.
And then physically dragged her out to the ring, still beating on her outside the ropes. She rolled Green into the ring. Ref was waiting, called for the bell, and boom, official match.
Wow. And how did this short, sudden match play out?
Well, the show cut to a commercial break almost immediately after the bell rang.
Of course.
And when they came back, Cargill was still just dominating. Piper Niven and Alba Fire were watching from ringside, which added a little something. Green had a tiny comeback attempt, but then got hit with Cargill's finisher, Jaded. Cargill gets the decisive win.
Okay.
Then, after the match, this group called Secret Hervis attacked Cargill, but Tiffany Stratton made the save.
Right. That's a lot packed into what sounds like a very quick segment. Any notable observations about how effective it was or wasn't?
Well, the announcers themselves seemed kind of surprised that it was suddenly a match, which just sort of highlighted how impromptu it felt.
Yeah.
The sources basically called it a very basic squash match. Quick, dominant win just to make Cargill look incredibly strong. Doing it mostly during the commercial break, well, that kind of tells you how WWE sometimes uses these spots purely for character building rather than, say, competitive action.
Gotcha.
And there was also the observation that there wasn't really any clear storyline reason for Stratton to save Cargill other than, well, they're both baby faces, right? Good guys.
Okay. We also saw Cody Rhodes in the ring. He talked about his SummerSlam match against John Cena for the WWE Championship, even mentioned Hogan briefly. But the next match, that came from an ongoing feud, right? The Miz and Jacob Fatu.
Yeah, that's right. Backstage, Jacob Fatu was cutting a promo, and The Miz interrupted him. What was particularly effective here, I think, was The Miz telling Fatu that Fatu putting him on the shelf for 6 weeks actually helped him figure out who he is, and then he just slapped Fatu right after telling him he'd booked a match between them. That slap was noted as pretty funny for just the sheer nerve of it.
That is a bold move from The Miz.
Yeah.
So how did their match go? And what did it mean for the bigger story?
Well, The Miz tried to avoid Fatu at first, but the Samoan werewolf eventually cornered him and beat him down, sending Fatu into the ring post right as they went to commercial.
Okay.
Then, predictably, Solo Sikoa and his crew showed up, but Fatu managed to fend them off before hitting a Samoan drop for the win.
But it didn't end there, I assume.
Nope. Sikoa's group immediately jumped him right after the match. Then Jimmy Uso showed up with the steel chair to help even the odds for Fatu. Look, this match and the whole segment after it, yeah, they were predictable, but they did effectively keep that feud between Fatu and Sikoa moving along.
Right.
It was also interesting watching the Cleveland crowd. They were obviously happy to see their hometown guy, The Miz, but they were also cheering Fatu pretty strongly. It just highlights that complexity of wrestling crowds, doesn't it? Where charisma and performance can sometimes make those good guy, bad guy lines kind of blurry, makes for a richer experience.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, the final match of the night then. It was for the tag titles. Andrade and Rey Fenix earned their shot against Dexter Lumis and Joe Gacy of the Wyatt Sicks. How did this main event play out?
Right. They won a fatal four-way to get there, and the match itself was described as a pretty solid back-and-forth contest at the start until Fenix got taken out by Loomis at ringside, which really shifted the momentum. At that point, the Wyatts took control heading into the break. When the show came back, Loomis and Gacy look really dominant. Quick tags, double-team moves, keeping Andrade and Fenix separated, unable to get anything going.
Sounds like the Wyatts were cruising to a pretty decisive win then.
Well, not quite. And this was a point of contention in the sources, actually. The show didn't really commit to a decisive win. Nikki Cross, another Wyatt Sicks member, she pulled the referee out of the ring.
Oh, okay. So a DQ.
Exactly. Caused a disqualification, meaning Andrade and Fenix technically won by DQ, which, isn't ideal for a main event finish.
No.
But it immediately led to this huge brawl. The rest of the tag team division, basically all the teams, showed up to fight the Wyatts together as like one unit. Then this guy Fraxium took out DIY, and it just exploded into an all-out brawl everywhere.
Wow, an all-out brawl to close the show. And that set up something big for SummerSlam, right?
Yes. The WWE official Nick Aldis, he eventually came out and booked a TLC match tables, ladders, and chairs for SummerSlam involving all the teams that were in the brawl.
Okay, that sounds chaotic.
Yeah. And it was noted that the Street Profits and DIY had another kind of tense moment backstage earlier, hinting their rivalry might boil over in that TLC match. One point the sources brought up was that WWE spent significant time on the full, elaborate Wyatt Sicks entrance.
Right, they have that whole presentation.
Exactly. But that meant the actual match ended up feeling shorter than maybe it should have. Suggests maybe a prioritization of character presentation, especially for a new group like the Wyatts, even if it cuts into the wrestling time.
Interesting trade-off.
Yeah. But despite the DQ finish, that big chaotic brawl at the end was deemed pretty fun, a good visual. The sources did say this match was probably the best of the night.
Yeah.
But they qualified that by saying it wasn't exactly a high bar to clear, given the rest of the show's in-ring action.
Ouch. Okay, so pulling all these threads together then, what's the overall takeaway from this specific SmackDown episode as we head towards SummerSlam? What's it tell us about WWE's approach right now?
Well, the sources generally concluded that this particular Friday SmackDown felt very light on actual in-ring action. It heavily favored the non-wrestling segments and, of course, the emotional Hogan tribute at the start. It was apparently more than 30 minutes before the first actual match even began, which was seen as maybe excessive even by WWE standards. And when the action did finally start, most of the matches felt kind of rushed and were definitely hampered by all the commercial breaks.
So the quality of the matches themselves really suffered because of that pacing and structure then.
Yeah.
What are the sort of consequences of that for a huge event like SummerSlam coming up?
Yes, the quality definitely seems to have suffered. Even the main event, Andrade and Fenix versus the Wyatts, wasn't considered like a standout match. Looking bigger picture, the sources collectively suggest that this SmackDown and maybe the broader build-up for this first two-night SummerSlam has left, well, quite a bit to be desired, at least in terms of in-ring quality and maybe consistent storytelling momentum. It maybe signals a potential challenge for WWE to consistently deliver compelling weekly TV when they're balancing so many different elements, tributes, celebrity guests, multiple feuds on the road to a major pay-per-view.
But there's still some excitement on the horizon, isn't there? Despite maybe these criticisms of the weekly build.
Oh, absolutely. That multi-team TLC match at SummerSlam, for instance, that's highly anticipated. It's expected to be just a chaotic, fun spectacle that could really deliver on the in-ring action front.
Okay, so what does this all mean for you, the listener, as you're heading into SummerSlam? This deep dive into SmackDown really highlights the multifaceted nature of live sports entertainment, doesn't it? You've got these solemn emotional tributes, strategic build-ups, the actual wrestling. It's just a constant balancing act between all these different priorities.
And it really prompts, I think, a critical question for you to consider. In a show where, significant time is given over to non-wrestling segments, where matches sometimes get cut short by commercials or end controversially, and where even the quote-unquote best match maybe doesn't set a super high bar, what truly defines a successful night of sports entertainment, especially on that crucial road to a massive event like SummerSlam?
That is a great thought to chew on as we wrap up this deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration. Keep that curiosity burning, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.